2 ships, 225 men, 4 years mapping the Pacific for the King of France, reporting back like clockwork the entire way. Then, one day, they sailed over the horizon and were never seen again. No wreckage, no survivors, no word, for 39 years. And when someone finally found the wreck, that wasn't the end of it. Some of the men had survived, and then vanished all over again on a boat that's never been found. March 1788, Botany Bay, Australia. A British lookout watches 2 French frigates, La Boussole and l'Astrolabe, sail out past the heads and disappear over the horizon, heading north into open water, until they're just a smudge, and then nothing. It's an unremarkable moment. Ships leave harbors every day. Nobody on that beach has any reason to think it matters. It's the last time any European ever sees those ships, or anyone on board them, again. 3 years earlier, none of this looked like it was heading toward disaster. It looked like the opposite. In 1785, King Louis XVI personally commissioned the expedition. He knew navigation well enough to help draft the route himself. His model was obvious: Captain James Cook, Britain's legendary explorer, who'd spent the 1760s and 70s charting the Pacific piece by piece. France wanted its own version, bigger, better documented, with the king's name attached. He put a career naval officer in command, Jean-François de Galaup, Comte de la Pérouse. 2 ships, 1 mission, fill in what Cook left blank. And he didn't send La Pérouse alone. Astronomers, physicists, botanists, an illustrator. This wasn't just a naval mission. It was a floating research institute, backed by the full weight of French science. Everyone involved believed it was the safest expedition France had ever launched. And for 3 straight years, it delivered. La Pérouse rounded Cape Horn first, the storm-battered tip of South America that sailors feared more than almost anywhere else on Earth. Then Chile, Easter Island, north to Alaska, back across the Pacific through Hawaii, Macau, the Philippines, Japan, charting coastlines no European map had ever recorded. And at every single stop, he did the one thing that matters most to how this story ends. He sent his logs, his charts, his letters home. Whatever ship was heading back to Europe, his reports went with it. Paris was never in the dark. New pages of the map of the world kept landing on a desk in France, and every one of them said the same thing. The mission was working, exactly as planned. None of it explains what happens next. By January 1788, the expedition reached Botany Bay, and it walked straight into a historic coincidence. The British First Fleet had landed only days earlier, the ships that would found the colony that became Sydney. For 6 weeks, French and British camps sat side by side on the same shore. 2 empires' explorers, trading news and supplies, while an ocean away, nobody had any idea France itself was 18 months from revolution. Before leaving, La Pérouse wrote one final letter. He handed it to the British for delivery to Paris. In it, he laid out his plan. Sail north through the Torres Strait, the narrow, reef-choked passage between Australia and New Guinea, and be home in France by June of 1789. That letter is the last confirmed word from the expedition. Everything after it is silence. June 1789 came and went. No ships, no word. And here's what makes that so unnerving. This wasn't an expedition that had ever gone quiet before. For 3 years, La Pérouse had reported in like clockwork from one port after another on the other side of the world. Then, at the one moment everyone was waiting for him to sail home. He simply stopped. By 1791, concern in Paris had turned into alarm, serious enough that the National Assembly, mid-revolution, with its own government barely holding together, still found the resources to send a rescue expedition after him. It searched the Pacific and found nothing, not a mast, not a survivor, not a rumor with any substance to it. If a government expedition with a navy behind it couldn't find a trace, nobody expected an answer soon. Nobody got one, not even the king who'd sent them. Picture the morning, January 21st, 1793. Cold, gray, fog over Paris. 20,000 people packed into the square. Louis XVI climbs the scaffold steps, turns to address the crowd. And on a signal, the drums start rolling, loud enough to swallow his words before anyone can make them out. That's the moment history remembers. But according to a detail passed down in multiple historical accounts, in his final hours, Louis XVI asked his captors a question that had nothing to do with the revolution, his family, or his own fate. It was, "Is there any news of La Pérouse?" The king who launched the expedition went to his death not knowing what he'd sent an entire crew into. For the next 3 decades, nobody else knew either. The break came in 1826, and it came from someone who wasn't even looking for La Pérouse. Peter Dillon, an Irish sea captain working the South Pacific trade routes, put in at the island of Tikopia in the Solomon Islands. And he noticed something that didn't belong. European-made items sitting among the locals' own tools, a sword guard, iron tools, glass beads. Not new. These had been there for years. When Dillon examined the sword guard closely, he found what he believed were initials stamped into it, La Pérouse's own name. He asked where it came from. The islanders pointed him to a neighboring island 2 days out by canoe, Vanikoro. They said 2 large ships had wrecked there long ago. Dillon didn't have the means to investigate right away. It took him until 1827, sailing first to Calcutta to secure a ship and the backing of the British colonial government. Then he finally reached Vanikoro himself. Wreckage from 2 ships smashed against the island's fringing reef. Artifacts scattered across the shallows. When the material reached Paris and was examined, it was confirmed. La Boussole and l'Astrolabe, both destroyed on this reef, almost certainly in a storm. Case closed. Mystery solved after 39 years. Except it wasn't, because what the Vanikoro Islanders told Dillon next was so much stranger than the shipwreck itself that the wreck almost stops being the point. Survivors, the Islanders said. Some of the crew had lived through the wreck, made it to shore, and stayed on Vanikoro for months afterward. And they hadn't just waited to be rescued. They'd built something. They used timber salvaged from the broken hulls, wood cut from the island's forest. Months of work, building a smaller vessel, 2-masted by hand from scratch. Shipwrecked sailors on an island most of Europe couldn't have found on a map. It should have been their way home. When it was finished, they loaded it, launched it into the lagoon under an open sky, and sailed away, trying to make it back to civilization. Nobody on Vanikoro ever saw them again. Think about what that means. The expedition wasn't erased in a single instant, the way the Botany Bay lookout silence made it seem. Some of these men survived the disaster that killed the mission, and then vanished a second time, on a boat nobody has ever definitively traced. somewhere in a Pacific Ocean that had already swallowed 2 frigates without a trace. The first mystery took 39 years to close. The second has now gone unsolved for well over 2 centuries. Here's where the story gets a detail most retellings leave out entirely. Because the clue that might explain the survivor's fate wasn't found by an archaeologist digging at Vanikoro. It was found in a newspaper. In 2017, Australian National University anthropologist Dr. Garrick Hitchcock was researching the history of the Torres Strait, and he came across something buried in an 1818 Indian newspaper, the Madras Courier. 2 ships, the Claudine and the Mary, had anchored off Murray Island that September. They rescued a stranded sailor named Sheikh Jumal. On board, Jumal was interviewed about what he'd seen: European weapons among the islanders, a compass, items, he was told, that came from a ship wrecked on the reef 30 years earlier. Most of the crew, the account said, died in fighting after they came ashore. One person was spared, a boy, kept and raised on the island. On its own, that's just an old rescue story from the wrong side of the Pacific. Then someone did the math. Run the math on 30 years earlier, from 1818. It lands almost exactly on the moment the Vanikoro survivors would have been at sea. And Hitchcock's research turned up one more thing. The expedition's crew list includes a ship's boy, François Mordel, from the port town of Tréguier in Brittany, a detail that makes the account impossible to dismiss outright, even though it can't be confirmed. No wreck has ever been found on that reef, no artifacts recovered and matched the way Dillon's were. This is a documented account, resurfaced through real research, a plausible answer, not a confirmed one. But if it's right, the last survivor of the La Pérouse expedition didn't die at sea chasing home. He grew up on a small island in the Torres Strait, among people who saved his life. His own name and origin eventually forgotten by everyone but him. Even that account doesn't end cleanly. Islanders on Murray Island later told the story of a young castaway, matching this same boy, who left one night in a canoe with 2 girls from the island, paddling out into the dark water, and was never seen again either, which means the ledger on La Pérouse's expedition still doesn't close. 2 ships lost, a rescue boat built and launched and lost again, and now, possibly, a survivor of that second loss, who may have lived decades on a Pacific island, and then vanished a 3rd time from a story that was already 3 vanishings deep. It started with a lookout on a beach at Botany Bay, watching 2 ships sail out of sight without a second thought. Because why would he think twice? Ships leave harbors every day. 225 men set out to map the unknown world for France. What actually happened to them is still, in its final chapter, unmapped. This is the 2nd video in a series here, stories of expeditions and disappearances, starting with how 129 men disappeared forever, the story of the Franklin expedition. If you want more of these, the best way to see them the moment they go up is to subscribe and turn on notifications.